Right. Good evening. This 23rd of November 2017. Now, wildlife crime threatens the security, economy and biodiversity of nations, specifically East Africa, as demand for products like elephant ivory and rhino horn continue to rise and poaching methods become increasingly sophisticated. Now, last week, the Trump administration put the brakes on a proposed policy reversal on animal trophy hunting in Zambia and Zimbabwe. Several reports suggest that the administration was reconsidering allowing the import of elephant ivory or trophy from Zambia and Zimbabwe into the U.S. The ban was put in place in 2014 by the Obama administration, and with that in mind, the conservation and sustainable management of wildlife and habitat is crucial to our region's long-term economic growth and development. Now, welcome to News Compass this evening as we take a look at the state of wildlife in our country. My name is Zainab, and of course this particular evening I am joined by my very able panel of guests. Of course, Jim Nyamu, an elephant research scientist and activist against poaching and trade in ivory. He's also the executive director at the Elephant Neighbors Center and the leader of the movement Ivory Belongs to Elephants. And of course, on my immediate, far right is Kahindi Lekalhaile. He's the director of Public Affairs for African Network for Animal Welfare. The organization is a non-profit animal welfare organization based in Kenya and focuses on welfare and humane treatment of all animals for human welfare. A very warm welcome to the program this evening, gentlemen.
Thank you very much.
All right, and as we get right into it, we, as a country, we have been in quite a prolonged season of politics. So I'd like to understand, has this affected our wildlife in any way? And if so, how? Maybe I'll start with you, Mr. Jim.
Thank you very much. I must appreciate the invite to come and discuss the issues of elephants and wildlife in this country. Yes, if you look at the relationship between the human being and the wildlife, and we're talking of the relationship in terms of the either economic value, social values, ecological values, since the beginning of this year, when we started this politics and all these things, a lot of attention went to politics, and very few even implementing those policies went into wildlife. And we've seen a lot of animals being killed, particularly like Kipia, where we've seen, like for the last 1 month, in a group over where we are discussing all these things as a honorary warden in Sabura Kipia.
Right.
We've seen not only elephants that are being killed, but we've also seen other small antelopes, giraffes and zebra. And why are they being killed? So we've seen a lot of retaliations because we're talking of a new wildlife and management conservation bill that came in place in 2014 that has not been implemented. Right. So by and large, either the politics or the lack of implementation marshal from the agencies that are supposed to do this, community feels that it is the time now. We do away with these animals because you can imagine losing your shamba, losing all your property, and even to some point, people have lost their dear ones.
Jim, what is inhibiting the implementation of this bill?
One of the things, it is not realistic, to be precise, because we are talking of compensating every person who lost either the farm produce, and what we've lacked is the proper arrangement. Because at which point do we come to your shamba and say that Zainab's this shamba need to be compensated? Because in this country we've lacked the land zoning. You know, if you look at the Masai Mara and Mara now, Masai Mara and Amboseli, everybody is becoming a farmer. So there is a lot of peninsula farms or haphazardly farms. So the structures and the policies, regulations, we started with a big law instead of first of all consolidating and see who need to be compensated. Right. The only thing that would be probably a debate to discuss would be the loss of a human being. That one, people need to be compensated. But for the loss of properties and you know, the farms, what we call the cooperating cases, it's something that need to be debated because so many people are even farming along the corridors, are even farming within the dispersal areas.
All right, and we'll definitely get to the issue of wildlife-human conflict in the country. But just going back to our earlier point, do you feel that the prolonged political season we've experienced in the country has affected wildlife in any way?
The answer is yes and no.
All right.
Yes, because there has been reduced vigilance on wildlife protection. And yes, because some political process, for example, to pass the amended wildlife bill, did not happen as a result of lack of prioritization in the August House. No, because what we've been seeing going on with wildlife has been going on for a long time. And we may complain a little bit now because of the political situation, but people have lost their lives, people have lost their crops. In actual fact, rhinos have been killed, this year. In spite of the incineration or burning of large stockpiles of ivory, we still have a lot of people arrested for poaching. We have a lot of court cases, going on right now. So it has been a mixed bag of things, but politics has not significantly affected, in my opinion, the status of wildlife in the country, just like with lots of other sectors in the country. I mean, we have been pretty resilient.
So definitely has not affected the wildlife directly, rather just indirectly.
It has not affected wildlife directly per se.
Yes.
All we have seen is we have actually seen the negative effects of lack of concentration and focus. For example, there has been an increase of livestock grazing in our national parks, for example. But there has been no change when it comes to attacks of tourists in wildlife areas. So some things have happened, some things have remained the same, and in my opinion, it will not be a big topic in relation to politics. I don't think what is happening to wildlife right now is being affected or has been affected to what has happened to the Kenyan political situation in the last 1.5 years.
All right, great. Let's now get to the elephant in the room, or is it in the continent? Now, U.S. President Donald Trump reversed a ban to lift importing game trophies from Zimbabwe and Zambia. Now, the issue of importing permits for elephant trophies from these two countries has now been put on hold. But conservationists have raised an alarm, saying that this will increase the number of poaching, or the number of just poachers going out there to poach, because then again it gives them an idea of actually the US is allowing they are going to allow this to happen. Isn't this just backtracking on the progress we've made in terms of poaching, even if yes, President Donald Trump has said, you know what, I'm going to just take a look at this particular bill that has been proposed and saying, but let's just be on hold for the time being. If it is allowed to go through and these trophies are sold in the US, this is just backtracking on this progress that we've made. Jim? Yeah,
if we look at the story of and the history of America when it comes to the ivory trading, America is the second leading consumer on ivory. And this is from the data produced by the Elephant Trade Information System by the CITES and the MIC. And I remember this has been a discussion since 1989 when George Bush by then was the first person to sign the treaty for banning of what we call the international ban on ivory. And if you come back in history here, this is when Kenya Wildlife Service was established. And all the African elephants, that are 7 countries, they were placed under an Appendix 1. That means all the population are threatened by the trade. Leave alone now we have seen some other countries like Zimbabwe, which have now moved from Appendix 1 to 2, Zimbabwe, Zambia, and Botswana and South Africa. They are now in Appendix 2, whereby they can now trade with ivory. That means their population is not threatened by the trade. You know, what Donald Trump is doing, I would call this Mauritius move, because we saw last year, and I'm very happy because China came in strongly and they removed themselves from the group of the 3 countries called as consumers. Previously, America was number 2 from China, and then UK was number 3. But when China crossed their illegal domestic market, America took over. And previously, if you look at the time when we had Obama, and I did a walk in the US from Massachusetts to Washington, D.C., comparing the Americans to do this. And by the time I was finishing the walk, the America, through the U.S. Fish and Wildlife, destroyed 6 tons of ivory, and they accepted to continue lobbying this. The move for the Donald Trump is something that he just is an afterthought. Because when we're asking ourselves, why Zimbabwe? Zimbabwe is sitting on a corridor. Because the population of elephant in Zimbabwe, they share the corridor from the neighboring country. And actually, this is even making May next year, April, I'm walking from Nairobi to Johannesburg to show the population of African is one thing. So even if they are allowed to do that, we may say, yes, you can go ahead and do this to Zimbabwe, but Zimbabwe hosts so many countries. Remember, America is a signatory for the treaty, which is now the international ban on ivory. And next year, there's a big conference in London, whereby America is a signatory. So, and I'm very happy, the White House, after they discussed how bad the situation is, they have put this thing on hold. However, they are still #1 leading consumer on ivory.
Oh, really? Interesting. Your thoughts, Kahindi?
America has got a very active domestic ivory market, and that's a fact. What Donald Trump is doing is playing a geopolitical issue here. And us criticizing or saying that what Donald Trump has done has got ramifications to gains we've made on elephant conservation on the continent and worldwide, is tantamount to burying our heads in the sand. The issue is much bigger than what Donald Trump, is doing. Remember, Zimbabwe is on the news right now. And if Donald Trump is Googles and checks what the situation of America is in relation to Zimbabwe, then that's one of the things that actually comes up. And he says, now that Robert Mugabe is gone, I think what we will actually try and do is restore some of the relations in order for the Zimbabwean economy to revive. Now, by doing that and actually us attacking Donald Trump on it, we are actually not thinking about Zimbabwe, we are thinking about Donald Trump. And I think the whole ivory trade question, just like the way it's been discussed very effectively at CITES, although not conclusively and not satisfactory to everybody, must be brought back to the African continent. And this is what I am referring to as burying our head in the sand. Ivory has built economies in Africa. At the moment, there is no way ivory can be sustained by the elephant population in the entire world. So trading in ivory should not happen at all anywhere in the world at the moment. The population of elephants in the world cannot sustain the demand. And this is where CITES comes in and says, can everybody stop? China, as Jim says, is one of the 2 largest traders of ivory, with the largest domestic ivory markets. The second one is the US. But China, by the end of 2017, will have already, eliminated its domestic market. Now, what we are trying to do right now is look at what Donald Trump is saying in relation to allowing tasks back from sport hunters in Zimbabwe. And sport hunting is a big industry in Zimbabwe. And he's saying, in order for the U.S. customer to be satisfied, then he will allow tasks back into that particular country. So he's addressing much more than Zimbabwe. He's addressing, the sport hunting industry, which is enormous in the U.S. So at the end of the day, what I don't want us to conclude and come to very fast, conclusion is that what Donald Trump is saying is very bad. It must be looked in context, in the context in which it's operating, and people must be aware of what the current situation is before we address him.
All right, and you've talked about something very important, and that is that hunting, the sport hunting. And the hunting advocates argue that revenue from legal hunting in Zimbabwe and Zambia and Africa as a whole helps fund conservation efforts in the communities in Africa. How true is this? And is this a leeway to allow hunting of elephant ivory and rhino horn in Africa?
Let me answer that question. Sport hunting, thrives in Europe, in Asia, and America. And I think that's a fact we've got to live with, that this is exactly what happens. And coming to hunt in Africa has happened way from the 17th century. In actual fact, Theodore Roosevelt came to hunt in Kenya in 1904. Kenya's revenue for tourism until the early 70s was from hunting. You know, so we were a big hunting destination, you know, until we realized that it's actually working against, you know, it's actually working against the wildlife populations and conservation in general. And it was decimating populations and destroying communities. Now, when it comes to countries like Namibia, Botswana, South Africa, Zimbabwe, Zambia, and Tanzania, these countries have got a very robust sport hunting industry. You know, animal rights and liberation activists say that killing an animal, especially through sport hunting, is actually a very immoral thing. And they actually argue it like that. But when you look at the setup of sport hunting in Africa, most of the revenue actually ends up in the country that the tourists actually came from. Because outbound sport hunters, all the revenue is actually left there. Now, our own mass tourism is not different. If you look at tourism in Kenya, and the revenues we actually get from tourism, we get less than 20%, you know, of what a tourist actually pays, you know, out in America. You know, so if you look at mass tourism and sport tourism and tourism in general, whether it actually benefits the host country or even the communities that host these particular visitors, there is a general question of leakage of revenue and income from the tourist. Again, we should address the whole picture rather than that particular one. When it comes to sport hunting in Kenya, we can't allow sport hunting because our regulations and our systems, you know, are not robust and strong enough to actually allow it. In countries like Zimbabwe and Namibia and Botswana, it has been happening, you know, to the detriment of a lot of populations. But the whole reason why communities actually allow it is because they get something out of it. Now, in Kenya, we rarely even get money back from gate fees paid at the KWS national parks. So if communities in Zimbabwe are asked, can we continue with sport hunting? They'll say yes. But is it a good thing or is it not a good thing? It contributes to the general decimation of species, and conservationists can actually argue that sport hunting contributes to conservation. It is debatable, but that particular debate should not be, again, buried in the sand. It should be brought, you know, onto the table where all participants are actually able to analyze and look at it, you know, very critically.
I'd like to get your thoughts, Jim, on the same issue on sport hunting and if the proceeds actually do benefit communities in Africa.
You know, I would look at these things from a point of a scientist. And I've been doing a lot of census in more than 20 countries in Africa. And what Kahindi is saying, it is a big topic here.
Right.
But I want to remind Kenyans here, most of the people who we call conservationists in Kenya here, from the north to the east, they were all hunters. Hunting is a name that today I would call a hunter, I would call him a poacher. It's just a color here. We're talking of this is a foreigner who is doing this, these are tourists who is doing this, but generally what he's doing, he's poaching. And what these guys did, they hunted so many animals, but when they realized that this business is not sustainable, most of them converted to conservationists. And most of these are people we see in the north and in the Laikipia holding those big ranches. So what Kahindi is saying here, and I agree with him, this is not something that personally, and I have seen, and that's why it is even within the Wildlife Management Act in Kenya, we may not allow this. Because how many animals are we talking about? If we would go ahead and do sport hunting for leopards, how many? We are about to list our leopards to red listed category of endangered species. If you go today in Tanzania, and I remember last year we did an awareness campaign walk there, there is a big group coming up now to ask the Tanzania government, then this is through the Wildlife Division and the TANAPA, tell us whether is this sport hunting sustainable. We may realize one day we may wake up and find we don't have zebras. Kenya, and I want to remind you, I was in the committee that closed down what we used to call the quota system in the late 90s. And most of these ranches you see in Laikipia, and even some areas in, like we had Machakos areas, when we would do the counting of animals, like what is happening as we speak now, they would attract those animals in their conservancies so that when we come to give them a go-ahead to hunt, they would have so many animals. But potentially these animals, they don't stay within their ranch. So they would attract those animals. And the collapse of conservation through the ranches actually came to an end when KWS aids the business of sport hunting. What am I saying? Marura and the Lamea farm were benefiting for this, and it is very clear, it is in record. But the moment this business came to cruise in Kenya, we've seen so many conservancies have closed down. CK Makiu in Machakos, it is gone. Portland, it is gone, because wildlife is not paying community direct. And this is where we come in now as conservationists, as social scientists, to encourage communities. We do not have to see money today, 1,000 going to Zainabu, 1,000 going to the other person. Wildlife pay us indirectly. The other thing is that they bring other benefits. And what Zimbabwe and other countries are doing, they have not been able to get this awareness that we may have. Look at Tanzania. For the last 4 years, they have lost their elephants from 140,000 elephants to 43,000 elephants. But if you go to the government and ask them, that's where we even, the minister in Tanzania had to resign. Namibia have voluntarily now said they are taking their population from Apedex 2, whereby they are legalized to do trade, to Apedex 1, trade, because they have realized, and remember, sport hunting and the trade are related. And I said, a poacher, we say poacher is an African guy, a black guy. But a sport hunter is a white man. But at the end of the day, they are killing animals.
Yeah, definitely.
So we cannot just say sport hunting is not poaching. It is poaching, and it is taking away animals. Only that it's the real tourists who come and kill animals. But here, about the poaching English, it is the African man, a Sabur man like Kahindi here, a man from Machakos and other places would go and kill animal, only that we call him a poacher. But at the end of the day, an animal has died, whether it is sport hunting or poaching.
All right, thank you very much, Jim. At that point, we're going to take a very short break. We'll be back, and the conversation continues on the state of wildlife in Kenya. You're watching News Compass. Stay tuned. All right, welcome back to the program. You're watching the News Compass, of course, just discussing the state of wildlife in our country, in the region, and globally as well. In the studio this evening, I am with Jim Nyamu, the Executive Director of Ivory Belongs to Elephants, and of course, Kahindi Lekalhaile, the Director of Public Affairs, African Network for Animal Welfare. And of course, as we continue this particular discussion, let's talk about the human-wildlife conflict that we're experiencing. Encroachment into game reserves has increased this particular conflict between human and wildlife. And of course, about 40% of wildlife space has been lost due to infrastructure and farming, and which is good for the development of our country. But what exactly is the solution so that we may be able to protect our national heritage as well as continue with the development?
Thank you. You know, there is a perception here about the increase in wildlife. And even livestock. The data that came, I think, 2 weeks ago from DRSRIS have shown that the livestock have reduced this country. And even the wildlife, and there is a census going on now in Laikipia, Saburu, has showed significantly the loss of wildlife. And this is because of other reasons that we may talk about, from the human-wildlife conflict to the drought to the poaching, among other things, natural deaths. So human-wildlife conflict, what it is being placed as we speak now, it is as a result of the expansion of human population that eats up to the areas, what we call the dispersal areas, and people settling in either corridor areas. We've seen, like in Savo, in Mara, people settling along corridors. And the other thing is that most of these animals in the parks, our parks are becoming very small. Smaller in the sense, there's so many lodges in the park. So they are looking for other areas. But when they look for other areas, they find communities have settled there. What am I saying? Human-wildlife conflict, it is caused by lack of the planning. If you look at today, in Aboseri, we've lost Aboseri as an ecosystem. And what I mean as an ecosystem, late 90s and early 2000, Aboseri, which is a very small park, was supported by 9 group ranches, 9 supporting community conservancies. And these were supporting a small park of Aboseri, because the population would stay within particularly elephant would stay within the park. And we did collaring elephants, and we found that 65% of these animals sped outside the park. And when we mean elephant moving, we mean elephant, buffaloes, lion, hyenas, everything moves out. But today, everybody now, you know what I mean? Most of the people in Kenya, they have piece of land in Abosere now. Those group ranches from Kimana, that's where we are getting the onions, the tomatoes, are all coming from there. What happened? Where is the dispersal area for wildlife? So the conflict has come as a result of that. The other thing we've seen, and Kahindi mentioned this earlier on, some of these areas are shrinking for grazing. And the pastoralist communities are buying animals every day because, like now, they've lost so many animals because of the drought. We saw some were even sold in Tanzania. So, but when they come in, parks are the only places where they can do grazing because there is proper management there. And you know, most of the parks, there is what you call the landscape grazing patterns within the park. What I mean that is more science. There is an arrangement. Generally, if you look at the Savo particularly, animals move to this area, and then by the time they are coming back here, the grass has grown. So we see communities are taking livestock in the park because there is proper management. And the Wildlife Bill of 2014 came in power to see how can they compensate these or mitigate human-wildlife conflict. Right. But this policing cannot be able to solve this problem until we have the land zoning. We zone the land. Like in Mara now, you go there, animals are coming in the park. And when we mean about human-wildlife conflict, we mean predation, we mean loss of life, injuries, loss of, or what Kahindi would call the disruption of lifestyle. These pastoralists, they do weddings anywhere, and elephants are cruising. So many cases have found communities at loggerheads with these elephants. Right. The solution to this would probably be what I'm mentioning, the land zoning. And I'm very happy for Samburu County. For one, they have done something that is tremendous, establishing more conservancies. Remember, like Kipia Samburu, there is no national park. But the 100% of the wildlife there are living in the hearts of community. Establishing conservancies, and also bringing communities on board. Let them own these conservancies. This is a dream of parks beyond the park. You are giving community an ownership of these parks. Right. And then they can now look at ways of generating income. Is like now a small Abosere park in Samburu, a small park in Mara, that they generate, but it takes time. Right. We will not look for money first, which most of Kenyans would look, but there are other avenues that as time build what we would call the resilience of people over time for them to appreciate the wildlife. All right, Jim, and of course, something important you've talked about, and I'd like to get your comments on that, Kahindi, says incorporating the local communities into establishing these conservancies that we have. But then most of these conservancies are owned by the white people, by the people from UK and US. So how exactly, what solutions do we have on the table right now?
The first solution is we need to stop talking about human-wildlife conflict. And we need to start talking about either human-wildlife coexistence or human-wildlife interactions. Right. Because the moment you put it into a conflict, then instantly you're in a negative mode. We must deliberately change from thinking that all interaction between humans and wildlife or other non-domesticated animals it just amounts to conflict. So that must stop in the first place. Now, what we are lacking in this country is a big idea to accommodate human-wildlife coexistence. Where is the big idea? That big idea is lacking. Because before colonization, people were living with wildlife. Before the Kenya government even existed, people were living and coexisting with wildlife. What happened?
Development,
I don't think so. I think we adopted principles that are not compatible with wildlife conservation, that is based on local values. And those local values must be brought back into national conservation policies. They are lacking right now. Let's ask ourselves this question. Why do we still have the majority of wildlife living outside protected areas than inside protected areas? In actual fact, we have both endangered and endemic species of wildlife more outside protected areas like national parks and reserves than inside. What is facilitating that? And this is something that the policymaker needs to sit down and think of. What is actually facilitating that is called tolerance. It is actually called local values that are entrenched in the customs and norms of people. Samburus don't look at an elephant as an animal. They look at it as a natural moral object that knows what is right and what is wrong. Somalis don't look at a lion as a predator. They actually look at it as another natural object in the bush that already exists in the mind frame and mindset, of their culture. So look at every single tribe and culture in Kenya. Tell me one that did not have wildlife as part and parcel of its story. Now, where is that in our wildlife policy and our wildlife conservation, agenda?
So what
it's
changed?
lacking.
So what changed?
What changed is we adopted Western perception of wildlife, where people must be separated from wildlife. And what we should think of is how people can coexist with wildlife. And let's go back to the conservation story here. Conservancies in Kenya, you say, are owned by white people. That's not true. Conservancies were actually first created by local people. The first man to create a conservancy in Kenya was Lerionka Olentutu in Masai Mara National Reserve, north of Masai Mara. And he did that because he realized that the people around Olchoro can actually get benefits, from wildlife through tourism. And that is actually the missing link. Sharing of benefits between people who live with wildlife and those who have business where wildlife is an attraction. That inequality must be solved first. Secondly, where there is a negative interaction between people and wildlife, we must look at products like insurance. There is insurance that exists for literally every single thing, including a bad face in this country. You can actually go get insurance against your face growing ugly, anywhere in the world. But how about when someone is killed by wildlife? There are more people who die of car accidents in this country than who die of elephant deaths. How comes it takes us 10 years to pay someone who's been killed by an elephant, and we only take a month or two to pay someone who's actually died out of a car accident? Let's look at crops. We imagine we insure our crops against drought. Drought is a bigger problem than wildlife. What is our problem? In going, straight to the ground and involving people in managing risks of coexisting with these particular animals. That's number one. Number two, how about opportunities? How many local people who coexist with wildlife basically have opportunities to actually benefit and celebrate the wildlife they live with? And I'll give you an example. There are more lions in Garissa and Wajir than in Tsavo East National Park. But have you ever seen a tourist going to Garissa and Wajir? Have you actually ever seen anybody going to, a national park that is not within the safe system? We have 68 protected areas in this country, Zainab. Do you know less than 30% of them see one tourist in a year? Tourists go to less than 30% of protected areas in this country. So we have a bigger question than human-wildlife conflict. Where is the big idea that will facilitate our perception, our coexistence, our interaction between people who live with wildlife and the policymaker, and also people who are using wildlife as an interaction? That is actually the missing link. The missing link is not conflict. And we, as a government, are actually oppressing people who live with, wildlife in a very big way. Our policies are very oppressive to people who live with wildlife. Our policies are very oppressive to pastoralists whose lifestyle actually facilitate, wildlife movement and the corridors in this particular country. So I think we need a big conference. I think we need a big, a talk shop as to where and how should we be addressing these particular issues. Let's not run to solutions that, we need to pay people who are killed by elephants. That's not the solution. The solution is, how does the person who coexists with an elephant get out and say, wait a minute, this is my resource, I like it, I enjoy it.
So what you're saying, it basically goes down again to the moral obligation of the people in Kenya.
It is the lack of inclusiveness and participation of local people in policy and lawmaking for wildlife that is a big problem here. Every single time we keep valuing our relationship in terms of money. How about in terms of attitude? How about in terms of norms? How about in terms of morals? Where are we? For example, there are so many tribes. I do not know of one tribe here in Kenya that doesn't have a rule against killing a particular animal, including a snake.
All right.
So where did we lose all this? Or are we saying that indigenous knowledge and methods of conservation are subservient and inferior you know, to modern methods of conservation. How comes, you know, what we are celebrating today, we found it, we never introduced it? You know, so those are big questions we actually need to ask ourselves. And as Jim says, we need to facilitate, as a nation, people coexisting with wildlife. We need to facilitate that. Right. And it's those ideas that we are lacking on the table. And the conservation agenda of this particular country must now move from non-governmental organization straight to the public. The public must now become the central decision maker and player to the conservation agenda. Because why am I saying it must move from non-governmental organizations? Because they fund a lot of conservation in this particular country. But the biggest donor to wildlife conservation in this country is who? It's the landowner. It is the Maasai, it is the Samburu, it is the Gabra, it is the Borana, it is the Somali. They are the biggest donors. So just because they don't produce money, is that the reason why we think that they don't have a role, you know, as far as wildlife is concerned? Right. We definitely must be able to rethink all that again.
Let me summarize in one word. By the thing that Kahindi mentioned, you know, the problem started with what I would call perpetual attitude. Perpetual attitude is what I would call maybe a nursery school teaching. There is a negative attitudes toward wildlife in this country. And I remember I did a walk from Mombasa to Nairobi. A senior government officer in a DC in Voi, he received me in Voi and he said, "I'm wasting my time." And he said, we have 1 million elephant in Tsavo. We only have 11,000. So the wildlife bill that we are now talking about was never discussed in the parliament because people have this attitude of KWS. KWS has been associated with a bad, it's like a hyena, you know. People don't like hyenas. When we do these campaign walks along the way, you ask people, what is the value of a hyena? In fact, people say they are greedy animals. So KWS is in that category of is a bad institution, and it is not that it is bad. It is because of one, how it was established. It is associated with people who are not, you know, are not Kenyans. But the attitude here must change. And what Kahindi is saying, if you go to where I come from, we were told that you should not walk during the night because you meet hyenas. Today, my son, or even myself, I grew knowing that hyenas are bad. We must go back and tell people what is the significance value of a hyena. If we were to lose a hyena, what does that mean? And I've been asking people. People are like, no, we don't need hyenas. Hyenas control diseases in the ecosystem. What is the significance value of even mosquitoes? Mosquitoes are also very important. But we need to go back, as Kahindi said, to the basic. Let's teach people, and people must accept. Because you can imagine, Kahindi and myself, we could be the parliament, as members of parliament, with our own ignorance. How would I pass a bill if I don't like wildlife? I would just say, these things belong to KWS, take it there, we don't need this. So we must go back to the drawing board and say, leave around these, because USAID, America have brought so much money in this country in the name of conservation. But no project is starting. Why? Because you are giving communities money to do and to implement a project, but they don't like wildlife. Let's forget about all these, move out of Nairobi, we go back to our communities, educate them what we call the basic knowledge.
They educate us.
Or they educate us. Actually, we talk about, why do you love this elephant? Because at the end of the day, these animals, they're not owned by people in Nairobi. They are people owned by the communities in the field.
Right. And definitely that's quite important to note. Let's just talk about something you did mention in some of the things you're saying in terms of legislative policies that maybe we need to push forward or implement, and even reforms in terms of protecting and conserving our wildlife. Maybe what is your opinion on that, and what more legislative policies can we come up and can we push for our leaders to put forward there?
Conservation must be part of the national political agenda. It was a very big disappointment, you know, that in the current political situation, wildlife never featured, you know, as a central issue, even with communities that have got a lot to say about wildlife. So we must be able to bring conservation of natural resources and wildlife in particular to the central political agenda. Why? Because wildlife and Kenya are synonymous in the image of the international community. There is no way you can think about safari anywhere in the world without Kenya. So that's our brand. You know, and we should be the first people to actually say, wait a minute, there's something that sells our country and we need to safeguard it very jealously. That's number one. Number two, we must be able to stop putting all our eggs in one basket. That one basket is Kenya Wildlife Service. Kenya Wildlife Service is the policy maker, it is the law implementer, it is the security and protector of wildlife. We must be able to stop doing this. You know, a Kenya Wildlife Service should be a technical institution. It should not be a land manager. National parks should not technically be under Kenya Wildlife Service. We should have a board for national parks so that at least they can work with counties, for example, in devolving wildlife and conservation, in that counties can actually ask their people, what do we do with our park in terms of increasing its attractiveness? So we must stop thinking inside the box and we think without the box. You know, because the box is actually misleading us as far as wildlife conservation is concerned. Let's look at what Jim Nyamu is doing. Jim is working even amongst communities that suffer from human-elephant interaction. But no community here has actually told him, get this elephant out from our land. No community has told him we need them all killed. They're all saying we are suffering. Why aren't they saying get it all out? Because they recognize that that particular animal has got potential. Our politicians must be able to talk positively about the potential of natural resources and wildlife and bring that straight to Parliament where we debate and we support what local people want, how they feel, and how they expose those particular resources. At the end of the day, let me say this. When conservancies started happening in this particular country, we have 144 right now, versus 68 national parks. So between national parks and conservancies, which are the most important lands for conservation right now, national parks or conservancies? It is conservancies, of course. You know, but conservancies take 16%, you know, of total land cover in this country. National parks are only 8%.
Right.
Why do we only market national parks and not conservancies? Yet the majority of conservancies are owned by local people in Nakuru, in Samburu, in Kajiado, in Taita, even at the coast. So we must be able to stop this whole attitude that wild animals belong to the white man and the only thing that Africans can do is stop and watch. Remember, and this is also another important point, our national parks were created by removing people from lands that they had actually occupied since time immemorial. That is a historical injustice in a way. And perhaps one of the things that contributes to this negativity, you know, towards wildlife, Kenya Wildlife Service and national parks is just because, you know, of that historical thing. So we must be able to have an inclusive discussion about the future of wildlife in this particular country. And that discussion must involve local people, local leaders, and politicians.
All right.
None should be left out.
All right, inclusivity. And just to wind up, of course, Jim, very briefly, your last thoughts and maybe just give us an insight of your upcoming campaign on ivory belongs to elephants.
Yeah, just before that, I have less than a minute to add what Kahindi said. The tourism of this country, we're talking of the 12% of our GDP comes from tourism. And this is my humble request. And I have been saying this, to add these policies to bring them together, we must bring tourism, Ministry of Tourism, and Ministry of Wildlife must work together. I was astonished and very embarrassed, Kahindi, attending the anniversary of tourism, and there was only one person invited from wildlife. Tourism depends on wildlife. So tourism, and we have Magic Kenya, we have Brad Kenya, they must brand this country using wildlife, not hyenas, not hotels, I mean. They've been branding the oceans and all these things. We must bring the hyenas, the animal that maybe we think it is not, has no value. The last point is this, and Kahindi has said this, over 70% of the wildlife, they are outside the park. So we need to take our focus to the communities, not just depending on Nakuru, Meru National Park, Aboseri, and Savo. Lastly, the supporting community, what we say, the community-based conservation program. We must not just see communities as poor people. The communities are so rich, and they have a lot of information. Going back to your question about the campaign, yeah, I've been raising awareness on this, not raising facts, just raising awareness. And on the 3rd of next month, I'll be walking from London to Bristol. And I'm crisscrossing through 9 towns, big towns, from Sweden to Cheltenham, all the way to Bristol. And ahead of this walk, the rationale behind this work is UK is second from America as a leading consumer on ivory. And they are in the debate now of either including the predating ivory or what we call the pre-convention. Ivory that has been there just before 1975 when the convention came in power, to bring them close together either for continuation of domestic or not. And this debate is in place now. So my works will be flagged off by the mayor of London, who happened to be a Kenyan. But I'm very happy to have him, the Minister of Environment, and I'm leaving the country on that 30th with the team of 6 people, my support team. And at the end of the walk, we will be given an award. This is my first award I'm getting, and thank you. And I will be awarded on the 17th as an international special recognition for conservation. But the reason why we are doing this work again, we'll also be marketing Kenya, my second objective. I'll be promoting Kenya as a second premier destination for tourism. And so we'll be talking about, when I'm walking there, I'll be carrying the Kenyan flag. But the day I'm arriving on the 1st, we have a press conference at the Kenyan High Commissioner, and I'll be having our neighbors' country, Tanzania, and Uganda, they will be backing me because I'll be working as not just a Kenyan, but as a person from East Africa, and I'll be carrying the message for the entire 7 countries in Africa where we have elephants.
All right, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Jim Nyamu. And of course, represent us well when you go out there.
Thank you.
Of course, just protector for wildlife. You are listening to this discussion on News Compass this evening. Of course, on my immediate right was Jim Nyamu. He is the Executive Director of Ivory Belongs to Elephants. And of course, Kahindi Lekalhaile is the Director of Public Affairs, African Network for Animal Welfare. Well, one key issue did come out very strongly is the fact that in order to protect and conserve our wildlife, inclusivity of all stakeholders is very important. Many thanks for watching. My name is Zainab. Ismael. Let's meet next week, same time, same place. Have a good night and God bless.